Hi, and welcome to week 4, part 2. Part 2 covers the rest of the New Palace period section, Minoan art, and also Mycenaean art. The New Palace period produced a number of other small-scale artworks that appear to have had ritual use. Some of the materials include ceramics and gold, as we've seen before. During the New Palace period, the Khmer's style changes and evolves into the marine style. Marine-style Minoan ceramics is typified by marine life as subject matter. The artists use oceanic motifs like the octopus and elaborate on and abstract them. The octopus flask, for example, utilizes the whole body of the pot for decoration. See a close-up of another marine-style jar and the kind of fun and somewhat spontaneous application of slit. Other popular materials include stone for carving as well as ivory and faience. Faience means something different in modern-day ceramics, but when we're talking about ancient ceramics, faience refers to a special type of ceramic that is self-glazing. The ceramist mixes granules of silica, which is glass or quartz, and other minerals that, upon heating in a kiln, create a thin glass-like surface. Faience was also popular in Egypt and some Near Eastern cultures. Faience was used in several small three-dimensional images that are often called snake goddesses, or perhaps more accurately, snake handlers. We do not know if these small figurines depict goddesses, priestesses, or worshippers using snakes in ritual. The snake handler figure depicted in your book is described as very intense. Her eyes bulge as she grasps a snake in each hand. She is dressed in typical Minoan women's clothing with the open-busted jacket and flounced skirt. Here we can see the apron-like feature that is often seen in the snake handler figures. See that here. Atop her head is a cushion-like headdress surmounted by a cat-like creature. While this figure and others like it are fascinating and seem to tell us something about Minoan religion and ritual, unfortunately, early reconstruction techniques were not as scientific as they are today. This figure is a combination of three similar figures that were found in fragments. The practice of putting together pieces of similar artworks is not uncommon, or not really a problem most of the time. But in this case, the figure appears also to have been repainted, and one of the arms is said to have been completely fabricated by the reconstructionists out of some new clay. But notice the entire figure does not look fragmented, and the new parts have been made to look old. Modern-day principles of reconstruction are similar to what we saw on the previous section with reconstructed frescoes. But back in Evan's day, the goal was to present something exciting and ancient to the art viewing public. Today, the goals of reconstruction are not to fool the eye, but to allow our own creativity, of that of the reconstruction artist and the viewer, to help us imagine what the original artwork might have looked like. Stone is also a commonly used material in smaller scale artworks. Stone is sometimes used for ritual vessels. The harvester vase is a carved vessel of steatite that is remarkable for the narrative on its surface. A group of figures seem to be marching while singing. They appear to be following the lead of a figure carrying a sistrum, a rhythmic drum, often used in rituals throughout the Mediterranean. The figures on the harvester vase jostle amongst one another. They are not lined up neatly within a register as we see in other art of early civilizations. It's unclear exactly what's going on in the piece, but due to the material and small size, the harvester vase may be more accurately described as a rhyton. Rhytons are containers or vessels used for ritual sacrifice. Sacrifice in ancient Crete may have included some human sacrifice, but more often, rituals would have included sacrifice of animals, some images of which are discussed later, and pouring of wine on the ground with a rhyton. The bull rhyton, which we can see, where can we see our bull rhyton? Coming, there it is, here, is a more complete vessel. A rhyton typically takes on figures of an animal, a god or goddess, or a narrative like in the harvester vase. The bull rhyton is a highly intricate piece. The steatite stone was incised, then the surface carvings rubbed with white kaolin clay to highlight the lines. The eyes are of shell, rock crystal, and red jasper, and appear very lifelike, which may remind us of Egyptian sculptures of chapter 3. The gold-covered horns easily remind us of the Great Lyre of chapter 2. The precise meaning of the bull in Minoan art and religion is not exactly known, but it may have similar connotations of power and fertility as we've seen in other civilizations. The narratives of sarcophagus paintings reveal something of the rituals associated with some of the objects that we have seen. The sarcophagus, you recall, is an elaborate coffin, usually made of stone. Minoan sarcophagi often depict rituals associated with death and perhaps other life-changing rites of passage. This sarcophagus painting shows a scene of ritual sacrifice. These rites may be funereal, which would explain their placement on a sarcophagus. The painting shows two typical-looking Minoan women, one over here and one over there, and a man between them playing a flute. Other similarly dressed women line up on the left. It's difficult to see them because part of it's been destroyed. In front of the man, on a table or an altar, is a trussed bull. The bull has been stabbed and is bleeding into vessels onto the floor, which you can see here and here. The woman on the right stands in front of a table or an altar. You can see that here. To the right of the altar is a tall column or pillar topped with a double axe, which you can just barely make out, upon which sits a black bird. Here, as in other Minoan artworks, the double axe or labrys does not appear to be used as a weapon, or used at all. Sometimes it hangs in the air, or as here, on the other side of the sarcophagus, sits atop a pillar. The opposite side of the sarcophagus shows double axis, or labrys, on top of pillars, you can see here. Women pour buckets, perhaps containing the blood of the bull, into a vessel below the double axis. Other male figures bring animal carcasses or skins to a figure who waits on the right. This figure has been interpreted as the deceased individual being celebrated with the images, and probably the resident of the sarcophagus. He stands stiffly in a full-length robe that disguises his arms. Perhaps this represents a real ritual in which the body may be propped up to participate in the ceremony. On the other hand, it may represent the symbolic presence of the deceased. The late Minoan period, 1450 to 1100 BCE, marks the beginning of the end of the Minoan culture's independence from the surrounding Mediterranean area. In the late 15th century BCE, Crete was invaded by the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. Their cultures merged for a time until the Minoan civilization was finally ended for good in the 14th century. It's believed that some natural disaster occurred about 1735 BCE, which destroyed Knossos and caused the Mycenaeans to abandon Crete altogether. It is here, after the return to the mainland, that we begin the discussion of Mycenaean culture. Hellenic mainland Greece, 3000 to 1000 BCE. Hellenic is the term that archaeologists give to the Bronze Age in mainland Greece. Here. During the early Hellenic Age, Greek-speaking peoples invaded what is today Greece and usurped the existing culture there. Hellenic culture is concurrent with the Cycladic and Minoan cultures we've already studied. Hellenic Bronze Age civilization is also called Mycenaean. The Minoans had already created a large sphere of influence through trade. The Mycenaeans, on the other hand, did so through war. By conquest, Mycenaean culture acquired the scope of influence once held by the Minoans. Mycenaean culture appears to have been much more warlike, and for that reason its art and architecture at times more closely resembles Mesopotamian cultures of chapter 2. The warlike nature of Mycenaean culture is clear when one studies the architecture at Mycenae and elsewhere. The citadel at Mycenae occupied 1600 to 1200 BCE. No doubt owing to its massive fortification, the citadel at Mycenae is often associated with Homer's epic poem The Iliad and the Trojan War. In fact, Heinrich Schliemann was looking for evidence of the Greeks of the Trojan War. Though he was convinced that he had found the site of Agamemnon's kingdom, the artworks he found dated to several hundred years prior to what is believed to be the era of the Trojan War. which seems to have occurred at the end of the Mycenaean civilization's horizon. Modern archaeologists credit Schliemann's overwhelming desire to find the Trojan-era kingdom with the spoilage of much evidence at Mycenae. Some archaeologists think that in his haste, Schliemann actually ruined the layer or strata that belonged to the Trojan War era in his haste to find it. For more notes on how Schliemann's zeal was problematic for Mycenae, check out the Mask of Agamemnon on page 97. The citadel at Mycenae is a true citadel, with high and thick walls 25 feet thick, made of Cyclopean construction, which is very large and roughly shaped stones. You can see in this aerial view and an artist's reconstruction here the locations of important places around the citadel. The citadel has many features that captured Schliemann's imagination, including the Lion Gate, which you can see here, and Grave Circle A. The Lion Gate is a type of entry that you are very familiar with by now. Right? Find it here, a nice image of the Lion Gate. Here we go. As in other early civilizations, such as Akkad in Mesopotamia and the Hittites of Turkey, two guardian figures warn off would-be invaders. The entry itself is a basic post and lintel construction, which is supported with a relieving arch. This guy right here. Triangular in shape, the relieving arch is so called because it provides relief for the lintel over the doorway, which would be under a lot of stress with the weight of the wall pressing down upon it. The wall stones are corbelled around the arch. That is, they kind of come in a little bit closer each course or layer. Within this clever structural feature, two monumental lions flank a column. The lions are carved of stone, but the heads must have been made of another material and attached. Due to the use of precious gold in important artwork at Mycenae, some have speculated that the heads were gold. Some people have speculated that they looked a lot like this lion rhyton that was found at Mycenae. The lions heraldically flank a column that very closely resembles a type of Minoan column, the upside-down tree trunk type that we saw at Palace of Knossos. The columns and lions surmount an altar. This combination of features also reveals the influence of Minoan art on Mycenae, which we'll see more examples of shortly. You can read more about the Lion's Gate on page 95. The Room of the Idols. The so-called Room of the Idols is a storage area that, when excavated, was filled with small sculptures. Most of the sculptures depict female figures of varying styles. On the screen you can see a view of the Room of the Idols as it was being excavated. Some of the figures topped cylinder-shaped bases, which you can see here and there. Others more closely resemble the second photograph here, showing two female figures and a snake. The two women are highly abstracted, only decorated in black and white, but their style of dress reminds us of some Aegean scholars of clothing worn by Minoan women. The prominence of snakes here and elsewhere has also been attributed to the appropriation of Minoan culture by the Mycenaeans. Grave Circle A, which is located in the reconstruction drawing, right about here, is a group of royal tombs that yielded many objects. And this is what Grave Circle A looks like in reality. The very elite of Mycenae were buried here in shaft graves, along with tall stone slabs and a number of objects that are of personal nature but highly luxurious. On the screen you can see a few items from Grave Circle A. You can see the Mask of Agamemnon, as it's called. It's one of a couple of hammered gold death masks that were found covering the face of deceased individuals. The lion-head rhyton was probably a precious ritual object, possibly belonging to an elite individual who held a priest or priestess position in the Mycenaean religion. The last item is a dagger blade. The blade is remarkable in that it shows a scene of a lion hunt in a very small space. The gold and silver decoration is antiquated with niello. Niello is a lead alloy applied to the metal that turns black when it's heated. Here it serves a similar function to bitumen, which you will recall from the chapter 2 was used to antique the negative spaces of artworks, like the shell inlay piece of the Great Lyre. In addition to the features above, the citadel Mycenae would also have had a regal-looking megaron. A megaron is a central room, which is usually a large, within which, is usually a large hearth. Such hearths are found on all major Mycenaean structures. Here's an example of a hearth in the Palace of Mycenae. As noted before, the Mycenaeans invaded Minoan Crete at about 1400 BCE, but instead of destroying the culture, they incorporated much of it into their own civilization. I'm going to show you a few examples that demonstrate the lasting influence of Minoan art long after Crete was all but abandoned. Frescoes at Mycenaean centers depict similar images to what we saw in Minoan Crete. Female priestess or goddess figures are prominent, and they often shown dressed in Minoan fashion, especially in this image where you can see the typical Minoan flounced skirt. The typical Minoan dress also presents itself in a tidy ivory sculpture of two women with a child, and also in a gold signet ring, which I'm going to find for you here. Here we go. And here we can see that style of dress that we're used to seeing. Now, other images from Mycenae suggest that these styles of dress were not that commonly worn in Mycenae. Now, that would not be surprising, considered that, generally speaking, more warlike cultures in ancient times tend to have stricter conventions of modesty. Other Mycenaean art forms, like ceramics, also display the Minoan influence. Mycenaean ceramic wares go through a phase similar to the marine style of New Palace period in Crete. Other works, like the warrior crater, on the other hand, display a distinctively Mycenaean interest in war. It's clear that funerary art, especially grave sites themselves, were quite important to the Mycenaeans. Aside from the shaft grave, as seen in grave circle A, the tholos, or beehive tomb, was quite popular for large and elaborate burials of the elite. The tholos tomb may remind us of the Neolithic passage graves of Chapter 1, in which the visitor or funerary attendant had to walk down a hall before approaching the tomb. This tholos is known as the Treasury of Atreus, and it's made with ashlar construction, as opposed to cyclopean. Ashlar construction is made of shaped, relatively uniform masonry stones, which you can see here. The stones form a cone-like shape through corbel vaulting, which you can kind of see in this illustration, and in which successive layers of stone are placed closer and closer together until it forms a roof or a vault. Also, like Neolithic passage graves, the tholos was then covered in a layer of dirt. See that here. The Treasury of Atreus is a misnomer that's also attributed to the Romanticism of early archaeology. It was entered by a very elaborate and tall gate, and this gate had a relieving arch, which may have had a similar image to what we saw at the entry to the Lion's Gate at Mycenae. The interior of the corbel vault, which you can see forms a cone-like shape. Tiryns became a larger power near the end of the Mycenaean age. The citadel at Tiryns was a large, heavily fortified and walled structure. As at Mycenae, Tiryns had an approach ramp and a gate, hearth and megaron. Though unlike the citadel at Mycenae, little decoration remains. Tiryns is well known for one important feature, its ring wall. The ring wall, installed around 1365 BCE, is a massive corbel vaulted piece of cyclopean construction. The ring wall is a wall with an interior channel. Long ago, it was believed that the ring wall was used in order to facilitate defense of the citadel by the military, who could hide within it and shoot arrows from its safety. On the contrary, Aegean scholars now believe that the ring wall was a defense of absolute last resort. It was a place of defense not for the military, but for civilians. The ring wall was made to hide in if the citadel were breached and under attack. After the Mycenaean age, Greece underwent a backslide in economic and cultural developments, possibly due to war and an influx of invaders. This post-Mycenaean period from about 1100 to 1000 BCE is often called the Greek Dark Age. After the Dark Age began the civilization we call ancient Greece. Next week, we explore the art of ancient Greece starting immediately after the end of the Dark Age.